Hello, my name is Emily Harper, and for my Theater History 1 project, I decided I wanted to study theaters and how they changed aesthetically in their structure and how they were utilized from Grecian times through Hellenistic and into Roman times. Now, the theater in Greece that I studied was the Theater of Dionysus, and that was mainly because it was a lot of firsts. It had the first stone structure cascade behind it. It was where the surviving Exodus plays were shown. A lot went on there. And to start off, a Greek stage usually had a circular orchestra pit or a dancing space. And the funny thing is they've been speculating and they think it might have been square, rectangular until the 4th century. But right now we have a circular orchestra. And the audience that would look down on this, they were built into a hillside, and it was originally wooden benches. Sometimes they would just stand, and eventually stone stands were put in. And one thing about the Grecian theater was they did not look down at the stage. The stands were far above it, and they would be looking at the scenery behind it as well as what was happening on stage. Now, one thing I was interested in is how did they make their scenery? What mechanics did they have? And a lot of speculation goes into there might have been a little altar inside of the Theater of Dionysus. But after reading up on it, if it was actually an altar, it would have been in Dionysus's name, and if they acted in that with that, it would have been sacrilegious. So it was probably a flat structure that they could act with, that they could sit on, move around, but it probably wasn't an altar. And also, to decorate this, Aeschylus's Oresta, I believe it is pronounced that way, was the first Exodus play to require a building as a background. And so to do this and to make these sceneries, they used something that looks almost like the flats we use today, and just a lot of speculation of what was put on it. Did they actually use them, or instead was it only like, a tree or a rock on stage that said, hey, I'm in a forest? Or did they actually have scenery, or was it just the dialogue that said, oh, we're in a forest now? But um, one thing that they did use, that we know they did use at one time in Grecian theater to show sets, was called a paraktoi. And this was a prism shaped structure that had a scene painted on each side. It had 3 sides. And so instead of having to pull down a curtain, which they did not use with these stages, they could just have an actor come up and turn it. And to give you an example, this would be a fractoid. It is not in scale with this, which is in 1/4 scale. I just want to make a giant one to show you what it looked like. Now, so they used temporary schemes out of a multitude of materials, and they all degraded. We don't know what they look like, but eventually, in the 5th century, a stone skein or skene was built to be behind this. It was separate. It was separate from the orchestra pit, and the orchestra was separate from the audience. They were 3 different structures. But based on the footprint of what was left of the Theater of Dionysus and the skene behind it, I made this also based on research images that were given of what it might have looked like. But so this is the Theater of Dionysus skene that I put together, and the orchestra is right there. Now, some of the mechanics that I was really interested in that the Greeks used, one was called a mechana, and it was a crane, and it would make people fly around stage. It would suspend them. And I find it really fascinating that they actually had flying technology all throughout these times when I know my high school never even dared to do it. They also had a rolling platform that would come on, and sometimes they would even display the body of a character that was killed off stage because they didn't really have violence on the stages. So, after Grecian times, there was the Hellenistic, and the big thing about that was they made the raised stage, but it was a lot different than what we use today. It wasn't that deep. It was very long. It could go on to like 140 feet long, up to at least 8 feet high, and it was open at both ends. Sometimes had stairs or ramps to take it down to the separate orchestra as it was, and the stands were still built into a hillside. The thing about Hellenistic times is that was when Rome's were being introduced, and a lot of the theaters that were built or that had been were kind of converted between a mixture of Greece and Roman theaters. In Hellenistic, the background fascade could went up to at most 2 floors. But when the Roman times came around, which was around 240 BCE, they were very ornate. They were very elaborate with their theaters that they built. Sadly, they only built about 3 to 4 um, stages, permanent stages. They could have built up to 900 temporary stages that just degraded over time. Um, but there are many stories about the stages that were built. There was one that the first floor was made of gold, the second was made of glass, and the third was made of gilded wood. But we don't know where that is, if it existed. I decided I wanted to build a representation, 1/4 scale, of the Theater of Pompeii, which was the first permanent theater built outside of Rome. And this is it. This is the facade of the stage. It's 3 stories. The main level, it has 5 doors on it, and um, usually the center doors were reserved for principal characters to enter and exit. Um, a big thing that happened with Roman theaters is they actually had curtains, and they had a front and a back curtain. The back curtain used to be very small, and it just started growing in size as it got more important. They would slit breaks in it to make an entrance through. They could use it to hide when they were changing scenery. Um, and then the front curtain originally was raised and lowered with telescoped poles, and then they would be lifted into a slot, and eventually they were suspended by ropes. And the very important thing with the curtains they used is it made a sense of surprise. And a big change in Greek architecture or Roman architecture that happened is in Hellenistic and Greek times, the fascade, the orchestra, and the audience were all separate structures. But with the Theater of Pompeii, this was a fascade. It had a stage right here, and then it sat on the diameter of the orchestra pit, and it was connected at the same height with the audience that was a horseshoe pattern. And then this stage is so huge, or this building. It has the Temple of Venus in it, it has shops, it has fountains, it has gardens. It is a beautiful structure. Um, and but one thing that Rome does have in common with Greek architecture or Greek scenery is that they also use the craftoi. So did Hellenistic times. And so, as I said, it is a prism-like structure with 3 sides on it. And you can just turn it to a temple, a creepy forest, or a countryside. And um, sometimes they would put many of these together, and so it would seem like a much bigger scenery. They're still used today in some plays, and it's very amazing. Um, I just loved doing this project and seeing how much it has changed throughout time and how so much of what is made in these times is still used today, especially how the Renaissance came about and how all our mathematics is made from the Greeks and their translations. And so that was my project, and thank you.